So we will start. Yes, we are going live on Facebook via the group to confirm that and we'll start. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Okay. Dear colleagues and friends, hi everyone. I'm Dr. Nouha Belaid, University Lecturer and Science Journalist from Tunisia. I'm happy to welcome you to our first meetup of Science Journalists in MENA. So Science Journalists in MENA is a WhatsApp group that aims to exchange the latest news, scientific reports, webinar invitations, and press releases about science. So the principal language is English because we should be open to the world. The group is affiliated with any party. It's an individual initiative launched by us to spread knowledge in the Arab world. It's based on teamwork and the expertise of experts in the field of journalism and science. So we will receive 2 guests every month, a science journalist, editor, and an international outlet. So regarding our meetup, the conversation between the moderator and the speaker will last for 13 minutes. After this conversation, the participants can raise their hands and ask questions directly to the speaker. You can also use the chat for any comments. So please keep the chat polite and civil. No interpretation, unfortunately, is available, but as I told you, you can use the bottom of the subtitles. And our guest today is Catherine Offord, Senior Editor of The Scientist. Good afternoon, Catherine.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you too for accepting our invitation. So who is Catherine Offord? Like a short biography. After undergraduate research with Spider at the University of Oxford and graduate research with ants at the Princeton University, Catherine left Atrops and academia to become a science writer. So she has worked in various guises as The Scientist, starting as an intern in only 2016, before becoming a correspondent. As a senior editor, she now writes articles for online and print publications and edits the magazine Is Not Blue career and bio-business section. I don't think it's enough because I know that Catherine has many things to talk about today. Is that true?
Well, it's a summary, but yes, I have worked in research before I came on to work on journalism.
Yeah, the screen is yours with the first question. What's the definition of science journalism?
Yes, so you've started with possibly one of the most difficult questions in science journalism there. And this is a question that science journalists ask themselves a lot and that we're constantly talking about because the answer isn't always very clear. I would say in a very simple way, the definition of science journalism is that is essentially telling stories about science for your readers. That can mean a lot of different things depending who you're writing for. So for example, my magazine writes mainly for scientists. So the kind of stories we tell are going to be different from the sort of stories a reporter at a newspapers such as the New York Times might tell, where they're writing for a lay audience or for the general public. But the principle is always the same. You want to tell an engaging and interesting story that is going to use some sort of narrative structure to transmit information about science to your readers. I would say that there's a very big debate in science journalism right now about the difference between science journalism and communication, science communication. And I'd be really interested to hear from you guys later if that's something that you're discussing as well. But essentially, especially during the pandemic, but even before that, there's been a bit of a divide in people who think that science journalism is really just a form of journalism that happens to be about science, which means that you try to strive for those journalistic principles like verifying everything in your stories, really extreme fact checking, trying to get sort of balance so that you have multiple sides of debate. That's what we consider journalism on the one hand. Some other people think of science journalism more as a form of communication. So perhaps helping universities or scientists tell their stories as a way to get information across. So that could be public health information or information about their research. So there's a bit of a, I won't call it a battle, but there's a bit of a tug of war between those two sides at the moment. And so this idea of what science journalism is a constant debate that we're having.
So maybe our colleagues later will have more question about that and what the difference between science communication and science journalism, because a member of the group, our WhatsApp group, are like a couple of science journalists and also communicator and researcher, and we are representing different fields, not only journalism. This has encouraged me to ask the second question. Should a science journalist be a graduate of a journalism school or a science school? What do you think about that? Based, of course, on your experience.
Yeah, I don't think that there is one correct way into this career. I personally come from a science background, and I have found that very helpful for me in writing for scientists. So it helped me a lot sort of reading scientific papers, helping me talk to scientists. But also I had to learn a lot about journalism as well. So I went to journalism school afterwards. I took courses to make sure that I was gaining those kind of skills, such as how to properly work balance into a story, how to fact check, and all of these other things that perhaps you don't get from a science degree. I actually happened to look up the statistics on this for a talk I gave a little while ago, and it really is kind of a 50-50 split. So it differs a little bit by continent, but actually in science journalism as an industry, it's about 50-50. So there are some people who have journalism degrees, there are some people who have science degrees, and I mean, there's a small percentage as well that doesn't have degrees in either of those fields. So I think there is a recognition in science journalism that you can come to it from both directions. You just obviously need to try and learn some of the skills of the other field on the way to becoming a science journalist.
I share the same opinion, by the way. So who are the journalists who work at the scientists?
Yeah, so rather fitting with that description, we're about 50-50. So I came from a science background. I would say that's true for about half of the editors that work with me. We're a small editorial team. We only have about 6 or 7 editors full-time. And the other half came from a journalism or communications background. And that's a really nice mix, because obviously everyone has different perspectives about what the most important things to emphasize in a story are. And so we kind of all work together on those stories. We also work with a lot of freelancers. So a lot of the people who do the day-to-day writing of news stories and that kind of thing will be people who work as freelancers all over the world. And either we have a consistent relationship with or who work for us as freelancers and pitch us stories once every now and again when they find something interesting.
So if you are encouraging and supporting the presence of freelancer, my question is, how could someone join the team?
Yeah, so we have
like working with a scientist and joining the team for an internship. Do you accept?
Yeah.
Like you have been like for the first time you joining the team, you have been for internship there?
That's right. I did the internship, so I can fully recommend it. I did very much enjoy that internship. That was about 7 years ago now. So we do have an internship program. Unfortunately, it's paused this current session, but they're planning to reopen it next summer. And we do accept freelance proposals and pitches. So you can find all of that if you go to thescientist.com. So it's the-scientist. www.offord.com. You can find that on our About page. It has something about writing for us. And actually, tell you what, why don't I just drop that into the chat right now? Would that be helpful?
Yeah. Nice.
Right. Scientist. And there's a list of editors and people you can work with there if you're interested, if you have a particular idea that you want to send to an editor. Here we go.
Can you share that on the chat, please?
I think I did, yeah. Did that come through?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. So you have the opportunity now to work for the scientist as a freelancer. Thank you so much. Okay. I just want, because like many people are joining us, and I want to flag to participants the link of to our Facebook group in the chat. So you can find on this group several opportunities for internship, research project, or online courses in this group. And please invite your friends and colleagues who can be interested in science, because we want to build together the community of science journalists. I will share it now, the link. So please join us and don't look any opportunity. Okay. Catherine, what do you think and what are the crucial skills of a science journalist? How to be a science journalist? Because there's difference, you know, as we told them at the beginning, there is difference between science journalists and journalists. So the crucial skills.
Yeah, that's another good question. And I think you can say that there are sort of two categories of skills for being a science journalist. One is to do with how you approach the work and your attitude. And the other are things that you can learn about reporting and writing and sort of the technical skills. So in that first category, I think that one of the things that makes it such an interesting job is that you need to be this sort of balance between humble and confident. So on the one hand, you know, there's so much stuff that you're not going to know when you start writing a story or when you start a project. And it's really important to work out what it is that you don't know and make sure that you fill in those gaps. So that means not going into a story with too many assumptions. It means making sure that you have all the facts before you go on to interview somebody. This is especially true when you're writing about difficult subjects or new science that maybe isn't completely concrete yet. But you also obviously need to get to a place where you are confident to pursue that story. You can write about it authoritatively, and you can go and interview people in a way that obviously makes it easy for them to talk to you and doesn't make it sound like you just learned science yesterday. So that's kind of the first thing, having that attitude. Also, it takes confidence to kind of reach out to people. I'm sure those of you working in journalism know that sometimes you need to be a bit pushy. You need to make sure that, you know, you're getting the responses you need. So you have to be very determined and sort of self-sufficient in that sense. Mm-hmm. And then there are the skills that I think that are really helpful, which are things that you can learn. So I'm sure all of you have come across resources like the Open Notebook, for example, where they have training for science journalists, which include things like best practices for reporting, interviews, how to organize your stories, and skills such as that. I would say also it pays to try and learn a bit of editing, because being able to edit your own work is an incredibly useful skill, so that you don't, you know, find that difficult when you do eventually work with editors, as all of us thankfully do. I think I would say those are the main skills, but again,
and
I'd be
also
interested
fact checking. You repeated many times. Yeah, you repeated many times fact checking. So fact checking is an important task for science journalists, I think.
Certainly, and I think that definitely comes into this kind of attitude of not being overconfident, that, you know, you will always need to go back to a story and try to read it as much as you can from an outsider's perspective. And this is true for all kinds of stories. It's especially true when you're doing, say, investigative work or something where you're publishing new results. You need to be 100% sure that you have really tried to disprove what you're writing to make sure that you are actually, you know, speaking the truth and everything.
So as a science journalist, how do you choose the topics of your articles?
Yeah, again, I think that depends a lot on who you're writing for. So at my magazine, because we are writing mostly for scientists, we're thinking about what would be interesting to somebody who already has a basic knowledge of how science works. So that means that things that are perhaps smaller improvements, but in a really interesting field, would be something that we might think would be interesting to a bigger audience. So for example, the other day we wrote a story about some piece of technology which is going to be able to track brain activity to the scale of milliseconds and millimeters. And that's obviously a tiny space of a very fast resolution. It's not a huge difference from the fact that people have been able to track activity before, but if you're a neuroscientist, it's revolutionary. So to us, that's a very interesting story. If you're writing for a lay audience, so for the general public, perhaps that's the kind of thing that would have been too specific for you. So you might instead have wanted to write a story about an entirely new technology that's going to work out how our brains work. So again, I think it depends a lot, but we have conversations about it all the time. Sometimes a writer will propose something, maybe the idea is almost there, but you need to change the angle slightly, which means that you need to think about how you would tell it in a more engaging way, or perhaps from a particular perspective. So I would say there are no bad ideas. Often it's just about working out how to tell it properly for the right audience.
Yeah, that's good to know that about that. But like as a science journalist, how do you spend your day between selecting the topic of your article? Do you have like a meeting, morning meeting or monthly meeting or weekly meeting as a science journalist, like a team of science journalists?
Yeah, so it varies. So I split my time between editing and writing. At a lot of magazines, you'll find that you just have editors and writers, but because we're quite a small team, we both do a little bit of everything. So my day is split, I suppose, between reading all of the tables of contents of the journals that we read about. So when you have scientific journals like Science, Nature, PNAS, they send a table of contents to journalists about a week to 2 weeks before those papers are published. And so you can see what's coming out in the next few weeks, what might be interesting, etc. If there's something where you just think this is extraordinary, you might assign that to a writer straight away. But if it's something where perhaps it needs a bit of discussion, then yeah, we have either weekly or bi-weekly meetings where we discuss ideas, talk about how we might cover them, who would cover them. And then the rest of my day is spent editing stories from writers and reaching out to scientists and other people for interviews, drafting. I will say that it's a very bitty job. If you're somebody who likes to have 10 hours of focused time, being a science journalist is very hard work because you tend to be working on multiple projects at once. You need to be able to switch focus quite quickly. Sometimes something will come in and you just have to do it right away. So it does help to be able to multitask or at least switch between tasks quite fast.
This has pushed me to ask another question. What are the constants which could impinge or could be really a problem for a science journalist?
The constraints.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some constraints?
Yeah, do you mean sort of challenges, like obstacles?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think, again, sorry with my categories. I think there are two categories of obstacles, really. I would say that there are external obstacles and internal obstacles. I would say the external ones are things that make the industry just more challenging on a day-to-day basis. So, for example, misinformation is a major obstacle to everyone working in science journalism right now, because you are constantly trying to write in a way that is balanced and fair and clear, but at the same time, not sort of fanning the flames of particular conspiracy theories or making things less clear. And it's very difficult sometimes to get that straight. And I think that as an industry, journalism hasn't really worked out how to solve that problem. So I think that's a big constraint on how we handle it going forward.
I will take the example of Tunisia and most of Arabic countries. Like one of our problem is access to information, and we suffered from the access of information during the COVID crisis. What about you? Like, did you have like such kind of problem when you ask for information?
Yeah, enormously. I mean, from every level of the information pipeline. So there were some scientists who were publishing bad research. There were some reporters who were not properly evaluating that research. There were people online who were reading that information from the 2 steps below and sharing it. And it became very, very confusing very fast. And, you know, as is the case with any scientific topic that is very relevant to society, so, you know, COVID right now, but previously vaccines, climate change, a lot of subjects like this, they become very personal and people get very angry. And so a lot of journalists receive a lot of abuse online, and just getting out information in a way that's clear so that people can understand, okay, this is the information and this is not correct and this is coming from a bad source. It's really hard for both sides, I think, to make that work. So that was very challenging. Yeah.
So, and what about the political context? The political,
yeah.
In MENA region, in MENA region, it can present a problem in some countries. So I don't know how it's happening in your country. Like
so
there is no pressure related to science information.
I'm based in Europe at the moment, and I would say on the whole, communication in much of Western Europe has been, I would say, okay during the pandemic. But in America, especially at the beginning, it was quite challenging for journalists. My publication is based in the States, and it was quite challenging for journalists because a lot of what they were saying was being directly contradicted by President Trump and his administration. And so there was a bit of a there was quite a lot of a difficulty for people trying to write about the latest scientific information when there was such a lot of contrast. That said, there is a free press in the States, and I think on the whole, people got through it, and the most that they received was, probably
so like we talk about
abuse.
We talk about OpenGov because like even in Tunisia, we talk really about, like we have a project of OpenGov partnership, but it's not really like a real project. We still have some challenges as a journalist. Is this the same problem in your country, in States?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think the problem is less extreme in the United States, but certainly there were lots of countries around the world where just getting information out was almost impossible, essentially.
Good. So do you have any advice to share with the participants because before like giving them the opportunity to ask more questions, because like we have one question in this chat. So any advice?
Sure. Yeah, I would say it's really helpful to think about what it is you want to do, because I think sometimes science journalism can feel like a single thing, but actually there are so many different ways of being involved in it, so many different audiences, so many different types of journalism or communication or whatever it is you want to do. So thinking about the different types of journalism and what it is you're interested in. And then once you've figured that out, or as you are figuring that out, to just read a lot, read publications, reach out to editors. A lot of times editors are looking for good writers. They will respond to you and also provide more advice. So I would just say definitely contact people if you're curious and want to find out more.
What kind of people? Only science journalists or even doctors and researchers?
I would say that if you want to learn more about journalism, it would be best to go to the magazines. But on the other hand, if you want to try writing a story, and that's how a lot of people start, they will write a story and pitch that to a journalism outlet. Sure, contact people, talk about their research, practice interviewing. Researchers are often quite happy to talk about their work, and so it's useful to practice that kind of interview skills and work out how to actually ask somebody about their research, both the good and the bad parts of that research, in the sense that, no study is perfect. It's useful to work out how to report the challenges of science as well as the results.
That's true. So we have like a question in the chat after, like, when you propose the opportunity of an internship and you shared the link for freelancer journalists. So one of our colleagues, Tarek, asked is it possible in the near future for the magazine to be fully translated into Arabic? The experience of Nature Arabic, for example. So maybe that's why he asked this question. So do you have any plan in the future to make fully translated of your content into Arabic, or at least to have an Arabic website for the magazine? And he thought, are there is any restriction for translating article into Arabic? You can read all the his comment in the chat if you want. Do you have any plan like the other Natures and many other like Saideb also? They have an Arabic version.
Yeah, so we don't have an Arabic site, and as far as I'm aware, we don't have a plan to turn it into an Arabic site or translate our articles. I know there are software options that help do that, but it's not something that I think our magazine is considering at the moment. We are a much smaller publication than Nature is, and most of our audience is in probably North America. But it's a good idea, and I'll suggest it to my team.
So you confirm that most of your audience is from United States, not outside United States?
Most of the audience. I mean, we do have a worldwide audience, and we definitely have people coming in from elsewhere, but it's certainly more US oriented, I would say. Yeah. But we have writers from all over the world, and we try to cover topics internationally as well.
Good. So now the screen is yours, dear colleagues. If you have any questions, if you want to share any experience or any information, so feel free, please. Yeah, Nouha, go ahead if you want. And please introduce yourself. I know you, welcome with us. So please, like we are building the community together, it would be good to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Nouha. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Nouha Shilla, medical doctor and medical journalist from Palestine. I will give you a brief of my background in science journalism. I am a medical journalist, so I write about the medical field as I'm a medical doctor. Mainly I write about health conditions of my community, the Palestinian community. And also I have a program. It's an online program where I interview young scientists and researchers who are also Palestinians. We interview them, we hear their stories and journeys. And also I'm coordinating a program where we invite big names in science, and we open a platform, an online platform where they can engage with school students, and we interview them and allow school students to be inspired by them and to ask them. And I have also some background in editing and be reviewing in Harvard Public Review on International Journal of Medical Industries. Actually, I wanted to comment on. First of all, thank you so much, Catherine, for your insightful talk. And actually, from my experience in medical journalism and in doing interviews and talking to scientists here from Palestine and outside, I began as a researcher, and then I entered medical journalism. And I really see the need that we have as journalists and scientific journalists to produce pieces which are evidence-based pieces. Like sometimes you talk that it's very important to think about your audience, and I was thinking and I was thinking about this when you told you should know who are you writing for. So I was thinking as a researcher first. I would go for published research or original article research in evidence-based in databases, in very known databases. But for lay people, I think we have an obligation like journalists when we say we write in science, we write in medicine, and we offer it to people who are non-professional. We have to focus more on producing pieces which are evidence-based, and we have the references that really based on scientific articles. And we saw this especially when Corona came, the need of producing such pieces. People can't talk can't understand the medical terminology we use already, but we had seen this issue that we need to communicate medicine in a really simple way. And there we see the need of medical journalism, maybe I can see in the whole world and also in the Arabic region, where we lack resources, we lack translated resources. So I wanted to highlight this, that we need really more work on making our pieces as scientific journalists evidence-based. And I also want to say something about the science journalism and communication. Maybe as a researcher, I see myself always try to communicate science. When I present my work, I communicate science. When I talk to my mom, I communicate science. But sometimes we use different ways to communicate science and the language we use. So I think everybody is a science communicator. Either I'm saying the right information or the wrong information. But journalism, it's like I see it as a professional way of saying science, of saying scientific information and it should be evidence based. So I wanted just to add this, just an insight I had from my experience, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the comment. I think that's really interesting. And I suppose there would be two things I would say to that. The first is that I completely agree that it's important to consider your audience. But I think one of the challenges during the pandemic was that everyone can access everything online. And so when the public started becoming interested in science, there were a lot of websites that previously were mainly aimed at scientists. So, maybe medRxiv, for example, or bioRxiv, or other places where preprints would be deposited, where normally scientists would read those. But suddenly during the pandemic, everyone started reading them. And the same is true with a lot of news websites. So news websites that would normally be directed at scientists or people interested in science were suddenly being read by a much wider audience. And so journalists needed to massively change the way they were talking about science, not just so that people would understand it, but so that they were also I suppose, debunking other incorrect theories while they were talking about the things they wanted to talk about. So I think that was the first thing. And the second thing is that I agree with the idea of communicating science, but I think one of the most challenging things to communicate about science is the uncertainty in science. And so explaining to people who don't study science what's definitely known, what's mostly known, what's unknown, but probably this, and what we just don't know about yet is really difficult. And I think the challenge is that, for example, in the United States, early on in the pandemic, there were some reporters who were very much trying to communicate the information that they were getting from public health officials. So, for example, there was advice that people shouldn't be wearing masks because they were ineffective, and actually touching them all the time would kind of make it more likely that you were going to get infected. And so all of these stories came out at the time saying, this was what you should do with masks. And of course, the guidance on that eventually changed because the science wasn't particularly clear at that point. That's what people thought. It turned out that actually masks were very helpful in stopping the spread of the virus. And so I do think we have to be a little bit careful about those kind of things, that as a journalist, I don't think you're the same as a scientist. I think that you are doing a slightly different job. And I do think that it's helpful to have a little bit of distance, just so that when things change, as they do sometimes with everyone's best intentions, you can be kind of clear and transparent and remain objectivity in that sense. But I completely agree with everything you said. I'm just talking about some of the challenges that I think a lot of reporters faced.
Yeah, I totally agree with the part of uncertainty of science. And this is make me remember a lot of situations where we dealt with people that we couldn't explain to them how we are uncertain, or we don't know a lot of stuff about corona. Even we are doctors and we are studying this and we are reading research, but sometimes we can't tell you everything, or we don't have the answers. This is really important. Thank you so much.
For sure.
Thank you, Nouha, for this comment. And we have like a beautiful comment in the chat from Dr. Tara for you, Catherine. So he said that I'm scientific writer and university professor, and I follow the magazine for a long time. And I would like to thank you very much for the effort and the distinguished coverage of modern scientific topics. So you can read the rest of this comment.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's why he asked about if there is possibility to have an Arabic version. It would be great to share the experience with Arabic, maybe in the future around the training session, if you can do it in the future. Any other question, please? Please raise your hand. Feel free to ask any questions, maybe to share an opinion about what Catherine was talking about. No, even in Arabic, I can translate it for you if you want. No questions? Okay, Adam, he said, I'm creative journalist. What kind of scientific skills do I like to improve? Do I have to improve? We talked about that, but if you can maybe share again.
Could you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by creative journalist? Do you mean that you normally write sort of pieces from a first person perspective, or?
Maybe like he's working for a digital website, because when we talk about creativity.
I see. Scientific skills. Yes. Well, I would suggest trying to read papers as they come in, essentially. So I mean, instead of reading press releases, although that's a good place to start, but instead of reading press releases or digest versions of scientific articles, I would really try to start reading actual scientific papers to get used to the language and the style and the way in which results are presented. I will say that after my own biology background, I did a degree in biology and I did a master's, and I thought I was used to reading scientific papers, but I hadn't read scientific papers in disciplines outside of my own field. And that was the hardest thing for me, was just getting really fast on reading scientific papers outside of my discipline. So I think that is probably a very useful thing. As for other scientific skills, I think you need to get that sense of uncertainty that we were just talking about, actually, and realize that every study is essentially a combination of pluses and minuses. Some things went well, some things were discovered, other things didn't go so well, other things are still undiscovered. And so getting that feeling for what worked and what didn't work in a scientific project is very helpful as well, because when you write a story about it, you want to make sure that you're bringing out both of those sides.
Yeah. Dr. Tariq, he asked another thing. Is there's still a market for the printed version of the magazine? I don't think.
Yeah, this is very sad. I think in general, print is a very it's difficult for companies to maintain at the moment. So there are still printed magazines. We still produce a printed magazine, but on the whole, the industry is moving away from that. You know, there are pluses and minuses. I think print magazines are beautiful. I love reading them. I like having a collection of stories that I can read through slowly when I want to. But of course, it means that you can't write things very fast because you have to produce them a long time in advance. And so I think both the cost of print magazines and that delay that you have when you're writing a story for 3 months from now, both mean that ultimately print magazines will probably be a thing of the past, unfortunately.
Abdullah?
Yes.
Yalla, go ahead, ask your question, share your opinion.
Good night for everybody here. I'm Abdullah Al-Balahi from Yemen government, Marib. Yes, we face a lot of problems, especially when we yes, before I am a humanitarian actor, yani, as journalism, humanitarian, especially in humanitarian. And we would like to advise us when you have content and we need to make a competent for something, how can we advise us?
Sorry, could you just repeat the second half of that question? I didn't quite hear.
Yes, I mean when you have something, we write as a contact about humanitarian problem, and we face a lot of problem with something with website and with the campaign, with the contact. No one can advise us and share with us as contact.
He's talking about the access to information. This is like the huge problem in the Arab world, even in Yemen. You know the situation there, actually, the political situation. So and like and there.
Oh, I think you're muted.
And there is like yeah, there is a link with the humanitarian context. So how do you talk about how you report stories? With science stories in such kind of context.
Yes.
That's true, Abdullah? صح? كده?
Yes, of course.
Okay. How do you report science stories when the situation around them is so difficult that it's hard to actually get the information? Okay, yes, understood. Well, so I suppose the closest thing that we've written about recently has been about researchers fleeing Russia and Ukraine in the last year or so. We've tried to write stories about how that has affected research there. But in terms of trying to get scientific information to people in those areas, is that the question, or is it more about the position of people in those places?
Both of them.
Both of them. Okay, so I mean, in terms of writing about situations, you know, typically we try to find people who are there, who are on the ground, who can talk to people or know people who are, so that we can get a picture of what's happening in a particular place. And obviously those stories are very sensitive. It's difficult to do them well. But typically as an editor, you're trying to sort of cultivate writers in all of these different places so that you can get stories and properly tell stories that are happening in different places, even when there are things going on in the wider context that make that difficult. As for getting information to people in those areas, that's something I personally don't have experience with, and I think is a very challenging thing to do, because obviously, you know, you can get information online, but that's typically the only thing you can do when you're not actually in a place. We can put all of the information we want online, but somebody then needs to make sure that people have access to that information or to spread it to people there. So I would be really interested to hear your guys' solutions to that, because I don't think that's something that we have expertise in.
Thanks a lot, really. I appreciate your participate, and let us ask. Thanks a lot, and thanks, Nouha.
You are welcome, and welcome to all colleagues from Yemen. Another question.
Thanks a lot.
Shukran. Another question from Dua. From your experience, how can we encourage young journalists to go towards science journalism? As in the Arab region, we don't have much people working in science journalism. Our initiative is like an opportunity to promote science journalism in the Arab world. That's why we want to have more speakers from Europe and America to promote the best skills in this field. But Catherine, do you have another internship also? It's an opportunity. What else? What do you think? What type of advice can you share with us to promote science journalism in the MENA?
I personally think that seeing science journalism as something that affects us every day, everywhere, is a useful way to think about it, because sometimes people think science journalism is just about writing about this fun new discovery, but it really touches on everything that happens in the world, whether that's environmental information, technology, medicine, health, climate change, whatever it is, there is some aspect of that which is likely to be influenced by science today, and therefore there is a role for science journalists. So I do think that helping people understand that you really need this person who is going to be able to translate this science into something that members of the public or government officials or other researchers can understand and digest quickly is perhaps a way to encourage people to go into that career. Because I think the last 3 years have taught us that it is a very important career. It's necessary to have people who can do this fast and who can do it reliably and make sure that the information that they're sharing is correct. So I hope that more people will realize that in the coming years. As for opportunities, there are a lot of opportunities for training science journalists, and a lot of them are free, because I think a lot of people do see this as an important career.
Could you share some links with us after this call? Yeah, if you can do it like this in this chat, or maybe by email, I can share with the participants later.
Sure, I would say a really good place to start is the Open Notebook. That is designed it's a website, and it's designed for science journalists and people starting out. And it just has lists and lists and lists of resources, whether those are internships, places to pitch, editor emails, information about the different types of stories. So are you working on an investigation? Are you working on a news story? How do you go about that? It's a really good place to start. So I think that's a very useful one. Also, the Night Science Journalism, just putting that in the chat.
Yeah.
School is also very useful. They also have free resources and courses to give people sort of a taste of what it's like and to help them start.
Good. That's why we encourage people, like journalists in general, to encourage to improve their English, because most of the opportunities are in English. We have a few opportunities in Arabic world, like we got opportunities with the Goethe Institute, like a couple of training sessions, and also British Councils. So that's why we have to check maybe the Night Science Journalism they propose. I know the course on science journalism, and it's very interesting. It's an interesting course. Another question, do you think that we need a university degree in science journalism? like if you think in the future to recruit someone, and do you prefer someone who got a degree in journalism, or someone else from from a science faculty, or maybe he got a master in science journalism? Could be a solution for you as.
We talked a little bit about this earlier. I think it's one of those jobs where so much comes from the experience of actually doing it, that I don't know if a science journalism degree, sort of combining the science and the journalism, would necessarily do much more than somebody could get from coming from one of those degrees and then trying to learn the rest on top. Obviously, that's biased by my own personal experience, but I found that learning the science formally was very helpful for me, and then learning the skills to be able to communicate that science and write about that science afterwards was the way that worked for me. But I know people who have come into it from the other side. It's an interesting idea, though. I mean, perhaps there will be a specific degree. There are some science communication degrees which include journalism, but also include things like marketing or media relations, or perhaps working with governments and things like that. So I suppose that's the closest thing, where you get a little flavor of each type of science communication. But I don't know, we'll see. Possibly, as I say, I think it's becoming a more important role, so it may be.
Okay, we have like three experiences in the Arab world. One in Lebanon University, and the second one in Morocco, Izik. And I know that there is like a degree in science journalism, in science communication in Dubai. So, but I didn't I don't know if it's a good experience or no. Like they started with experience the last 2 years. So we will see in the future the impact of this experience maybe on the field of journalism.
Are those degrees funded? So do you receive funding or a fellowship if you get accepted? Because that's the situation a lot of the time in the US as well.
But we haven't to pay, like in the Arabic world, you haven't to pay for for the university in the public school. I mean, because like we have the public universities and the private one. The private one you have to pay for your studies, but the public one, like it's free of fees, so you haven't to pay. And both of them, like the Lebanese and the Morocco, both of them are public universities.
Yeah, I see. Because a lot of the time in the United States, and I think also in the UK, you might be able to get funding for your original degree. So if you say, like, let's say you do a science degree, you can get some funding to help with that. But typically science communication or journalism degrees are these 1-year, 2-year master's programs, and they can be prohibitively expensive. And so I think that's another reason why a lot of people try to learn on the job. You know, you start pitching, you start learning, you do these free courses, because I mean, the price is ridiculous for, say, a 2-year journalism course with the London School of Journalism or something like that.
And even practical experience is better, I think, than university degree. This
I
is
think
what, like, I recommend also to get an opportunity for an internship is better than getting a master degree if you want to have experience.
I agree. And at the end of the day, an editor is going to look at what you've written. You know, I mean, if you can write and you have told a good story, then yeah, that will serve you well. Sorry, it sounded like somebody asked something.
No problem. Okay, do you have any other questions? Ibrahim? Ibrahim Buda, do you want to talk? No questions, chats? I think this is the end after 1 hour of conversation. My sincere thanks to our speaker today, Catherine Offord, Senior Editor of The Scientist, and to all our webinar participants, including those who posted questions. Thank you so much. And as a reminder, you can review this webinar on our Facebook group. If any participants would like to join our WhatsApp group, please email me after this webinar, and I will be happy to add you to our group. And of course, we will continue working on promoting science journalism in the region. And our next meetup will be online on the 20th of December with another guest. It will be a surprise. So thank you, Catherine, for the present. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. See you next time.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.